Hi everyone, my name's Natalie, and this is the Mental Matters podcast. It feels very weird for me to do this because I am in no way, shape, or form someone who should be giving advice on the situation, because I am actually starting this podcast because I am in a really rough state at the moment and have been for the past 9 months. So I'm using this as an outlet and a sort of way to not only inform people who don't know much about mental health, but to also help out people who are dealing with the same issues at the moment. And when I say I've been struggling for the past 9 months, that's simply just this episode. But I have been struggling with my mental health since I was about 10 years old. And that's a really long time to be dealing with this kind of thing that's so taboo in a lot of cultures and communities. And I'm Armenian, and I had never heard of the term mental health or anxiety until it happened to me, and it was such a foreign concept. Today, it's a lot more known, but in my community or in a lot of places, it's still not seen as a real issue, and it's seen as something that can be thought out of the pain, but that's just simply not the case. So maybe I will regret sharing my life and my experiences and just being very vulnerable on the internet. And I'm sure that people I know will see this one day and will hear this, and they can laugh, or they can learn, or they can, understand or try to. But this podcast is it's not about sympathy, or it's about empowerment, and it's about knowledge, and it's about resilience. And I'm 22 years old, and I've been dealing with these issues since I was 10. So that's a very long time. And it has been challenging. It's hard to think about where to start even sharing. It's not an easy thing to just dive into. It's in person, I have no trouble at all talking about it, and I am quite open about it with people I know and people I don't know. But unprompted on the internet is something I've never tried. So I'm pretty nervous, but I'm pretty excited. But I'll just start with the beginning. So it was around 10 years old, and it's the first thing that I remember. And no one else remembers me being anxious before this. When I was a child, I was a very outgoing, really, really out there. Like, I'd love to dance in public, and I'd love to go out, and I'd love to laugh. And it all kind of changed from one day. I was at the park, and I witnessed two kids, right after each other, back to back, right after each other, throw up. And till this day, I don't know why, and I don't think I'll ever know why. That moment unlocked something in me. It was like a switch went off inside of me. All of a sudden, I got this weird wave of heat in my body. And I just felt terrible all of a sudden. And I went back home from the park, and I and I grabbed a blanket because I couldn't stop shaking. I was sweating, but I was cold and I couldn't stop shaking. And I wrapped myself in the blanket and I was huddled over the toilet, and I was just, shaking, and I was waiting, ready to be sick. I felt sick and I felt like I was going to be sick. And it's happening, and nothing's happening, nothing's coming out. And the next year after that was pretty horrific for me, for everyone around me. I wasn't able to leave my bed. I had lost 20 kilos. I refused to eat or drink because I was so sure that I was going to throw up. And I would have these like shaking fits, and I would freeze in place, and it would look like, if you had never met me before, it would look like I was having like a seizure. It was so bad, and we didn't know what was going on. So for the next year, we just went doctor to doctor, and I was getting worse and worse, and I wasn't that same kid anymore, and I was so sure there was something wrong with me, that I was sick and we needed to find it. But every doctor would say, there's nothing wrong with her, we can't find anything wrong with her. And my parents are obviously freaked out. Their kid's sick, no one's helping them. They don't even recognize her, she doesn't even recognize herself. Until one day we went to a hospital, and I remember in that hospital I again was having one of my fits, shaking, freezing, and by freezing I mean like I would feel like so close to throwing up. I would freeze in my spot, like I would refuse to move. My hands would lock up. It was like I was shriveling up inside, and if I didn't move, that would like stop me from throwing up. It was, I don't know what the thought was behind it. It was all instinct. And eventually, I'd feeling that way. I'd feel sick. I'd feel nauseous. And we went to the hospital, and they were like, you need to eat this icy pole before we see you. And I turned to my mum, and I'm freaking out, and I'm like, Mum, like I feel so sick, I can't do it. And keep in mind, like I haven't been able, like I wasn't eating or drinking for the past year, like properly or at all. Like I was a shell. And for the next like 45 minutes, I'm crying, I'm freaking out. I want to go home. I can't eat this icy pole because I feel like I'm gonna throw up. And the nurse was like, if you don't eat that icy pole, we're gonna have to shove a tube like down your throat. And that just freaks me out even more. And I'm pacing, and I feel like I'm gonna pass out. And I tell my mum, I'm like, Mum, I can't do it. And eventually my mum sees how much like I'm struggling, and we secretly throw out the icy pole because I just could not do it. And then I had to, we were waiting for like 5 hours. It felt like I was dying for those 5 hours, and it didn't settle down. Whatever was wrong with me was at its peak, and I didn't think I was going to make it. Eventually the doctor, it was our turn to see the doctor. And one of the first things he did was he handed me a cup of apple juice. And again, I'm freaking out. I'm like, I can't drink this. Like, I'm going to be sick. And he's like, have you been sick? Like, the past year that you've been saying you've been feeling sick? And I said, no. And he was like, you have to drink that apple juice. eventually I did agree to have a sip of the apple juice, and that's when he told my parents and diagnosed me. He said, your daughter has generalized anxiety disorder, GAD. And that was the start of it. So it took us a year to get a diagnosis and a year for someone to tell us that physically there was nothing wrong with me. But I have an anxiety disorder, and that's why I am reacting the way I am. And it was a mixture of disappointment and relief. It was relief, obviously, because we had an answer. We were searching for an answer for a year. But the disappointing thing is that when something's physical, it's a lot easier to see and to understand and to, fix it. But my parents and I, we had never heard of, something being broken inside my head. It was unheard of to us. So after that, we decided to get into therapy. At the local doctor's office, there was a Armenian psychologist, and we decided to see her. We try therapy intensively because, keep in mind, every time I try to leave the house or to leave my bedroom, or get confronted to eat or drink, I would panic. But I couldn't help it. It was like it was programmed that way. I again would start shaking, like I would start gagging, and my hands would start sweating, but I'd be freezing cold and shaking, and I'd feel sick. And so I was having fits at school, at dance, at basketball. It's one thing to feel that way, but to have no one understand what it is and why you're responding that way. I had a lot stolen from me because of this time. Like, I had time and memory stolen from me, a lot that I remember from my childhood of going to basketball and to dance and school and scouts is just me having a fit as soon as I got there, and having to leave and having to disappoint my parents and to feel like the worst thing I could ever feel, and to have no one around me understand. Till this day, it saddens me and it affects me. People can be relentless when they don't understand. People can be, their immediate nature when someone doesn't understand is to ridicule. So there was a lot of bullying when I was a kid when it came to this, because no one understood why I would react that way. They would think I was spoiled, or they would think I was a brat, or they would think I'm trying to get out of class. They would think I was faking to get attention. I've heard it all. From kids and from parents, I've heard it all. But my mum exposed me to these things because she wanted me to not miss out on my childhood, and I'm grateful that she did that, because I don't know what I would have done if she didn't, because if it was up to me, I would have just brought in my bed. But it was traumatic as well, because it was painful, to go out and to feel like you're dying every day, all day, in front of people that don't understand and that judge, and to disappoint your family every day is one of the worst things. So to try and kind of overcome this, we were told to start therapy. So that's when we started seeing my psychologist, and I was around 11 at this time. And we did that intensively for a year or two, and we realized that we're going to have to start exploring medications, because I'm not coping, and I'm calling my mum every day to come pick me up from school. I'm getting dance solos at Armenian dance, but I can't show up to the lessons because I'm having a panic attack. And I still don't understand them, and my parents still don't understand them. They're so new to us. So at the age of 13, a psychiatrist prescribed me fluoxetine. The brand name is Loven, and that helped me a lot. It made things easier. It didn't make things go away, but it numbed it a little bit. So I was able to get through things a little easier. But again, it still wasn't gone. It was still a struggle, but it made me last longer in the environments that I was afraid of. And I was doing a bit better at that point. And then when I was about 16, 17, our school takes, once we're in year 10, our school takes us to Armenia to visit our motherland. And Scouts also that same year at that same time, there was a 10-day scout camp with over 1,000 Armenian scouts. So it was a big one, and I was freaking out because my room, my home is my comfort environment. It's where I feel the least anxious. So being so far away from there and being like a 24-hour like plane ride away is one of the most scariest things to me. So I was really freaked out about that, and eventually I went, and I about halfway through I ran out of my medication, and I was like, I'm doing this all by myself. Like, well done me. Like, I'm doing this without my medication. Like, I don't need it anymore. Like, I'm cured. And I told myself, because I've done the hardest thing that I could do, which is go overseas, and do these hard things like go on a 10-day camp in the middle of Armenia, like, I was cured. So I stopped my medication cold turkey. I don't recommend this, by the way. It's not a very smart decision. I stopped it cold turkey, and I was great the rest of my trip without it. And I noticed about after a month I got home, I was starting to struggle doing things again. Being a bit more sensitive in terms of triggers and all of that, and to the point where it went to the point where I would just bawl my eyes out because I couldn't cope with anything. And at this point, my parents were overseas, and I was not in a good place at all. And after seeing my GP, she sent me straight to the hospital, which again, the hospital is a very triggering place for me, especially what happened to me as a kid when I got diagnosed. So I was obviously in one of my states again. And as I grew older, the anxiety, I would manage it a bit better, but I wouldn't be as scary looking when I was having a panic attack, being 16 or 17 as when I was like 10, because I really didn't understand it then. By this time I knew what was happening, but I was in quite a messy state at the hospital. But eventually they saw us and they were like, you need to start back on your medication. And I was really defeated, and they were like, you should not have stopped your medication like that. Like, you were supposed to taper down and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I did not know any of this. And I was silly. I was young and I didn't listen. And my parents didn't know either. Once I told them that I hadn't taken it for 2 weeks, they were happy. They were ecstatic. They didn't know. again, we're still new to this. They didn't know, I didn't know. I messed up. So I was very disappointed that I had to go back on them. I was in a state for the next few months and not being able to do anything, not be able to leave the house, struggling to eat or drink. And I went back on the dose that I was on of the Loven before I quit. And after waiting 12 weeks of hell, I felt nothing. And my doctors were like, okay, this medication isn't working for you anymore. And that was like a sucker punch to the gut. What do you mean I suffered that long? And just for it to not work? And why does the medication that worked for me no longer work? So that really sucked. But then they recommended to try this other medication, which is called Lexapro. And that was amazing. I loved Lexapro. I was able to get to one of the best points in my life with Lexapro. I was able to go to concerts. I was able to travel like in Australia. I was never home, which is, if you know me, like when I'm anxious, like the only place that can calm me down is home. And the fact that on Lexapro I was never home, it says a lot about how it was working for me. And this is where the not fun part happens. So eventually, after a few years of being great, and I was 21 years old at this point, and I said, Mum, Dad, I'm ready to travel, because I hadn't traveled since being in Armenia. And they were so excited because they always they love traveling, and they've always wanted me to go with them, and I would never go because I was scared. So I said, I really want to go to America, and I want to see my cousins in America, and I want to see my best friend in Canada. And they were like, do you know what? Done. Let's go. Let's do it. So leading up to it, I was absolutely fine. I was not afraid at all. I was just purely excited, and I was so relieved that I was just excited and not anxious. And even as I was packing the days leading up, I was completely fine. On the plane, completely fine. I was completely fine, and we had even got upgraded to business class, and I was like, oh my God, this is a dream come true. Like, look at me, I've grown. Like I'm going overseas, and I was just the happiest I had been in my life. That I was finally able to live my life. And then the plane landed. That switch that I spoke about in the beginning of the episode, that switch that went off, it's like someone just reached in my chest and turned it back on. So here I am, just having a panic attack in LAX on 4th of July weekend, might I add. I am dying. I'm pulling every trick out of my book of coping mechanisms that I have, and nothing is working. No amount of deep breathing or hard drugs like Valium is even making a dent in what I'm feeling. And we said, you know what, it was a long flight, we'll give it a couple days, and we'll see what happens. Fast forward 5-6 days later, I am unable to leave the bed. Every time I get out of the bed, I start shaking and I start gagging, and I cannot, for the life of me, function. And I'm messaging my therapist while across the country, and I'm using all my coping mechanisms and all my techniques that work for me, and nothing is helping me. I can't eat anything because I feel so ill. And after a week of dealing with that, I sat with my mum and dad, and I was like, if this goes on, like, we're gonna have to go home, because I can't do this we were supposed to be there for a month, and I'm like, I can't do this for a month. I'll die. Like I can't. I had already lost a few kilos in the first few days because I couldn't eat, and those were some of the worst days of my life. Having thinking that all your prayers were answered and you'd finally overcome everything, just to be, slapped in the face and be like, like my anxiety just coming back and being like, here I am. And I was so depressed on top of that because my dreams had just been shattered in front of me. The person that I had worked so hard to be was just ripped away, and I had done everything right. That was the thing that pissed me off the most. I did everything right, but things still went wrong. What did I do to deserve this? Eventually, my friend was like, try CBD while you're in America, because obviously in Australia it's not really a thing. And that actually ended up saving my trip. I was able, again, it was not easy at all, but it helped me get out of bed and it helped me do small things. So when I got home and people asked me about how was your trip, it was just easier to say it was great, because how do you even explain what had happened? And I expected when I came back home that things would go back to normal. I was like, maybe I just wasn't ready to travel, but now that I'm back home and back in my comfort zone, things will go back. 9 months later, things did not go back. I don't know what it was, because Lexapro worked very well for me, and I have been in intense therapy since the age of 12. I never stopped seeing that therapist, and I always thought I was doing the right thing, because I'm not someone that just relies on medication. I believe it's a great tool, but I believe in doing the work to address the root cause, because one day the medication might not work. And that day happened, but my work meant nothing. Everything that I put into it, I was just that 10-year-old girl again that had just had her first panic attack and didn't know what was going on with her. It was like I had started from rock bottom, and I don't know how I got there. We tried to up the medication. After 12 weeks of waiting on that made me just feel absolutely worse. Terrible side effects, made me feel sick all the time. And it was my sister's wedding coming up soon, and I was the maid of honor. So we didn't have the time to change the medication. So getting through that wedding was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. The week before, I was depressed in bed. I couldn't get out of bed because I was so convinced I was going to miss my sister's wedding, because, again, no matter how much I explain through words how I felt, to someone that hasn't experienced this, it just sounds, oh, she's being dramatic. She just needs to get up. She'll feel better once she does it. You don't understand until you feel it. But I did make it through my sister's wedding, thank God, with a lot of tears, a lot of Valium, a lot of alcohol, a lot of... Don't recommend doing this, but I had to get through that day. But it was one of the toughest things I've ever had to do, and I'm still recovering from it. Yeah, now we figured out, obviously, that Lexapro no longer works. My miracle drug no longer works on me, and that freaking sucks. So, after working with my psychiatrist, we decided to start Zoloft. So now I'm in the very crappy stage of withdrawing from Lexapro and starting Zoloft, and that is why I feel so terrible right now. Right now I feel like how I felt as that 10-year-old girl. I'm in my worst state that I could be right now. I can't leave the house. I can barely leave my bedroom. My friends don't even know what's going on with me, because how do you even explain how do you even explain that you can't function because the chemicals in your brain just don't balance out like this? Like, it sounds completely silly to people that aren't familiar with it, and a lot of people in my community don't really know about mental health, because again, like, Armenians are old school and not everyone really believes in it, and it's frustrating, but it is what it is. That is where I am at the moment, and that is how I came to recording this. And again, it was an absolute mistake sharing my life story on the internet, maybe. But the goal with this this episode was just kind of a way to introduce myself, to be like, this is what I've gone through and am going through right now, and that's why I feel not qualified, but feel like I've been through enough to be able to speak about mental health. And I just want to shine some light on the issue, because it's taken away a lot from me, and it can happen to anyone. I grew up in a nice house with a beautiful family. I was never short of anything. I had a wonderful support system, but it still happened to me, and it still is happening to me. Genetics can be a factor. Anyone can be triggered by anything. It sounds stupid. Oh, she got triggered by seeing someone throw up. It can be that silly and stupid and affect you for the rest of your life. We don't control it, but we have to learn to manage it. One day I'm hoping that this will no longer be the case for me, and I'm really looking forward to getting back to my life. I'm hoping that this new medication gets me back to where I was, because I was, again, in the happiest state of my life before my trip to America, and I want to get there again. And I miss that girl, and I look in the mirror now and I don't recognize myself, and that's why it's just so important to have an outlet and to have people around you that understand what you're going through. And that's my goal with this, is to just somehow, even if someone's in my position right now, is to have something to say, is to have someone to say that you're not alone, and to keep going. Because, you know, God knows I've thought about, you know, not doing this anymore, because every time you think you're getting better, something keeps coming along the way and, you know, throwing you back down. But it's just not an option. It's not an option. I've got too many people around me that love me, and I love them, and I believe everyone's put on this earth for a reason. And there's still so much of myself that I want to get to know, because this person is not who I am. The person who I am right now is not who I am. I've seen glimpses of the person of who I really am while on Lexapro, and I want to get to know her more. And I'm not going to give up until I get there, because I'm not taking it. I'm not satisfied with this. I refuse to live like this. I refuse to live my life in my bedroom, on my bed, watching everyone grow while I stay here. That's my idea of hell, and I just refuse that. So if that means sitting in my room and recording a silly podcast for, I don't think anyone's going to listen to, then that's what we're doing, because whatever gets you through the day. Right now, it's just day by day. I'm not looking too much into the future. One day at a time. That was the first episode of Mental Matters. Thank you to whoever has listened to this, and I hope you took something from it. It felt really good to record and get off my chest and be able to talk about these things and talk about how I'm feeling without actually having to talk to anyone, because the last thing I want to do right now is talk to people face to face. So this has been really great. Yeah, so hopefully I'll record an episode 2. Thanks for listening.